Okay, guys, excuse me. Can we start now? Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm happy to see quite a few new faces, which is obviously a great thing to have. Tonight we're going to be talking about and discussing Martin Heidegger, yet another famous existentialist. As some of you remember, we spoke about existentialists before, people like Sarah and Kierkegaard. We spoke about Dostoevsky. We had a lecture on Sartre. We had a lecture on Albert Camus. Obviously, I did quite a few lectures on Nietzsche. He also belongs to that, I don't want to say philosophy, but much better to say revolt, known as existentialism. And although chronologically, Martin Heidegger comes before Sartre and before Albert Camus, there is a reason why I left Martin Heidegger to be the last in the series of lectures regarding existentialism. Martin Heidegger is notoriously difficult to read and also very difficult to understand. So I'm glad you are here tonight to help me, to help you to unravel everything that is so difficult about Martin Heidegger. And the difficulty arises before everything else from his attempt to, in certain way, rewrite the metaphysics, the history of philosophy, when it comes down to metaphysics. According to some scholars of Martin Heidegger, he literally destroys metaphysics as it was known to us until him. And I will explain to you why was that the case, what was metaphysics all the way up to Martin Heidegger, and what Martin Heidegger wanted to change, and what he saw it so differently. Heidegger is interested in the phenomenon, in the question of being. So as you all know, being has always been in the center of metaphysics in the previous philosophy, with the previous philosophers. Being can be understood as essence, soul, spirit, even God. So what is being? Being is something that is within everything, is everywhere. Everything is made of something, is made of being. So being with the capital B is the issue of his philosophy. Martin Heidegger is not interested in what the being is. He is interested how the being is, how something exists. How can we say about something it is? So he's interested in the existence of being. This is why he is existential philosopher. Everything that I will be saying about him is in all ways existential. It's all about existence. Now he's the first one to ask why there is something instead of nothing. Nobody asked that question before. Being was taken for granted. Everything is being, must be something. The world, people, rocks, trees, birds. So there is something that makes all this possible. So that was being. And everything else was called beings with a small b. So beings like people, animals, trees, they're all beings. But there is one being. I think this is not that complicated so far because it gets a little bit worse. So in an attempt to understand how being is, in what way it exists. Martin Heidegger comes up to a new phenomenon that he calls Dasein. Dasein means to be there. And who is Dasein? We are Dasein. Humans are Dasein. And this is one of the ways that being unravels itself to us. We are one of the way of the being's existence. Now, all the way up to actually from 16th century with Descartes, philosophy had turned into a wrong direction according to Heidegger, because Descartes introduced that famous spirit, res cogitans, meaning thinking thing. He came to the conclusion that the only way to prove the existence of the world is he who thinks. So he says, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. How did he come to that? So he looked around and he thought, how can I be sure that everything around me exists? Everything that I know, everything that I've been told, my trust to my senses. I can doubt all of that. Maybe everything around me is just a dream. I can doubt it as well. Because there is no proof that my senses are qualified to prove that something is true. But he says the fact that I doubt cannot be taken away from me, even if I'm wrong. Because I doubt, therefore I think. So he says thinking is the only way that I can prove that I exist. Not my material body, not everything around me that I see, but thinking. So with that, res cogitans, Descartes introduces his famous dualism. It separates the body from the soul. But this is not just body from the soul. This is the whole philosophy that comes after him. They take that on board. So immediately the philosophy takes the concept of subject and object. So the world is as such that we have a subject, human being, and we have the object, which is everything else, like world, like objects, like animals, like other people. They're all objects. So you have to have a subject and object. We have Berkeley's philosophy, you have Hume, they were all subjective idealists. But Heidegger doesn't agree with that. He says this is wrong. Instead of believing that human being is a thinking thing, he says no. Dasein is an entity which is directly involved in the world. Dasein is in the world. And this is what makes Dasein Dasein. Not thinking, but acting. Actively acting. So he means, instead of existence, which usually means something static, which simply exists, like let's say glass, or a phone, or a table, or a chair. He says, he introduces another word, he calls it existence. Existence. Pointing out that things are not static, and especially Dasein is active, ecstatic. So you see, he introduces new vocabulary in German language, and especially for other languages which are difficult to understand because you have to translate original. And that issue of existence and seeing Dasein as an active entity in the world, this is his identification of Dasein, or of the human being, not as Descartes taught, thinking thing. Until Heidegger, the world was understood as a substance, and especially as science took over religion. Everything was substance, everything was a matter. Science continued further to remain as a subject, and the world continued to be an object. But for Heidegger, there are different ways of of being. One, as I said, is Dasein. Another one is equipment or meaningful objects. So Heidegger says we are constantly surrounded by meaningful objects. Chairs, tables, knives, forks, hammers, screwdrivers, cars. So these objects have a meaning. Why? Because they need other objects so they can function. For example, hammer requires a nail, otherwise it cannot function. So he calls these objects meaningful objects. These are, he calls them equipment. On the other side, there is something he calls substantiality. These are things which are not meaningful objects. These are things like rocks, trees, water, whatever. Substance doesn't require another object to exist. Clearly, it doesn't have any intention with itself, but intention can only be brought by a human being. So we create something, we create a hammer, and hammer gets that intellectual, if you want, meaningful existence. But the important thing is that for Heidegger, only Dasein can exist, because Dasein, or human being, the one who is out there, to be there, Dasein is the only one who can ask the question about being. Dasein can only ask the question about what being is. Dasein can only ask the question, how can something be? Animals can't do that. Trees can't do that. Rocks cannot do that. And therefore only Dasein in his languages, his philosophy exists. He doesn't say that other things are not there. They are there, but they don't exist. So remember that. I know it's a bit confusing, but is the game of the language. We say for everything that this exists. Everything exists. But he says only the one that can ask about meaning of itself, meaning of existence. He gets that attribute of existent, existent, meaning ecstatic. He is involved directly. He is not just passive observer. He is directly involved in the world. So there are three ways of existence of the world: Dasein, tools or equipment, which is meaningful objects, and substance. So everything else which is not meaningful belongs to substance. So for example, when scientists observe something and they find some microelements in whatever materials they're looking at, those particles, they are substance. They don't require anything else to be what we want them to be. But hammer requires a nail, requires a plank. Otherwise, doesn't have a meaning. It's not meaningful at all. So you're getting that idea that he wants to constantly drive Dasein or human being together with the world. Human being is not separated from the world, as philosophy up to Heidegger proposed in many, many occasions. You have Hegel, for example. For Hegel, this is exactly like that. You have man and you have Geist. And this is dualism. Another thing that is very authentic very specific for Dasein is authenticity. Dasein is the only one that can ask about his own existence. Dasein is the only one that can become authentic. Everything else is not authentic. Even most of Daseins, most of the people are not authentic. So Dasein has that mindness innate to itself, built in. I am mine own entity. It's called mindness. And I will talk about authenticity a little bit later. Now, Dasein is not a subject. It doesn't exist independently of the world. It's being in the world. There cannot be Dasein without the world. And there cannot be world without Dasein. That's interesting. There is a story once during his lecture, he asked his students, what do you think will happen if you take human being out of the world? So students answered all kinds of questions, but they were wrong. He said, no, if you remove human from the world will stop existing. So world needs Dasein in order to be recognized, in order to be existent. He differentiates between the world and the earth. Earth is something else, but earth is a substance. But world in which we are completely immersed is something different. There is no world without human beings. There are not human beings without a world. He goes a step further and talks about the modes of encounter. So when it comes to, just to explain a little bit better, I mean, I've done I had to cover a lot of ground to simplify this to the point that you are hearing now. All this is coming from the book called his magnum opus, Being and Time. And it's extremely complicated and very rich book, which I hope you will read one day. So other modes of encounter, as I mentioned, you have equipment. So what is so important about equipment? What is important is that when, for example, he says when the carpenter uses a hammer, he doesn't think about the hammer. He doesn't think, oh, I'm going to use the hammer, and I'm going to use the nail, and I'm going to hammer this nail in the wood. He doesn't think about it. If you ever use the hammer, you never thought about it. You simply use the hammer and you nail the nail in the wood. You hammer it, and that's it. So you don't think about that object. You immerse yourself into the activity, because Dasein is related to the world through its activity, not only observation, intellectual observation, as science does, for example. Dasein, human being, is proactive, is active, it involves itself. So when the carpenter uses the hammer, he in a way becomes a hammer, and hammer becomes a carpenter. So that amalgamation of these two entities into action is actually what is he all about when he talks about existence. So we exist not in a way of thinking only and observing, we exist in a way of acting. I will explain to you in a minute what it means in a practical world. He says the best way to understand the chair is not to talk about the chair, is not to observe the chair and contemplate about it. It's simply to sit on it. You see how existential Heidegger is. So you need to use the practical application of the object in order to understand. He says the best carpenters, the people who work on the land. He lived in the Black Forest. He loved this area there. He was obsessed with nature. He observed peasants working there day after day, day after day. They understood the world much more, he said, without understanding it. They didn't understand in an ordinary way of understanding it. They lived it there. They lived on that soil. They work on that land. They produce crops. They produce food. They produce their own clothes. They were so much involved. They are world. They lived in the world. This is typical example of Dasein. So when you immerse yourself into an action, not just sit down and observe. So this is that readiness to hand. This is one way of mode of existence. He says also Dasein has no conscious experience of the items or equipment that he is using in every day. You don't even think about it. But now, he calls it ready at hand, ready to hand. But now what happens when the hammer breaks? Heidegger says now the carpenter is looking at the hammer and he is now observing it as something different. He is not immersing himself with it anymore. The hammer becomes an object. Hammer becomes an object. He thinks, oh, I need to change this wooden part. It broke. So that entity, that object, he calls present to hand. So you have ready to hand and you have present to hand. And in that moment, that broken hammer becomes an object. And the carpenter becomes a subject. You understand? In ready to hand, there is no object, no subject. They're all one. They are immersed into the world. Now, a few words about the world itself. In 1620, Francis Bacon published a book called New Organon, in which he saw that science can progress only if we get rid of idols. If human understanding and human philosophy and science get completely rid of idols. By idols, he meant God and everything else, which is directly related to our attempt to anthroposynthesize the world, to make everything human from our perspective. So he wanted to get rid of that. He wanted a neutral, completely neutral approach of the sciences towards the world. Because until then the problem was that God created everything. We are all God's children. So even the science was driven by those fundamental premises. So he wanted to get rid of idols. They call it false assertion, that the sense of man is the measure of things. He says senses of man are not measure of things. So science followed that up to the point, and following that developed and came to the point that everything that we observe is just a method. We have nothing to do with it. We are dealing with the substance. The world that we inhabit is actually nothing but a collection of physical objects. Or is it? Heidegger says, is it? Heidegger said to reach this conclusion is clearly to confuse the universe with the world. The physical universe, he is willing to grant, is best explored to the natural sciences. But what is the world for Heidegger if he's not just observing material objects? This is something that he says that we emerge into it, as I said. So this is where Dasein is. Dasein is in the world. This is the place for us that we can disclose the being and ourselves. Getting deeper into the existential matter, as if you remember, it was the subject of all the existentialists we mentioned before, Heidegger tackles the problem of rationality and passions. So you know very well that from Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky and Nietzsche and later Sartre and Camus, individual is always the primary. Individual is the most important. But it's not the reason that is most important in the individual, are the passions. Passions are more important than reason. If you read, for example, Age of Reason by Sartre or Stranger by Camus, or Man from the Underground by Dostoevsky, you will realize how much attention they pay to the human passions, because passions have been neglected. The humans have turned into just logical entities, calculative entities. Heidegger is very much against it. He doesn't want that. And the world is constantly orbiting around that problem, around the conflict between the reason and passions. In order to explain how important passions, emotions are, Heidegger talks about moods. So different moods, like for example fear, happiness, disinterestedness. These moods, he says, they assail us. Take for example somebody who is walking down the dark alley. He says, imagine yourself, you're walking down the dark alley in the middle of the night. Nobody is around you. And you hear some noises behind you. some cracks, immediately you sense danger and fear prevails. And you lose completely every contact with your consciousness. You are now in the mood of fear, and you're going to try to do whatever it takes, completely out of your conscience. You're not going to calculate, oh, maybe there is nothing, because if you calculate, maybe there is something, and maybe you're going to be dead in a second. So you are obsessed with fear. He says moods, they assail us, they take over us. So everything becomes that sense of fear. Where is the reason there? And that doesn't apply only to fear, that applies to happiness, that applies to disinterestedness. So he's bringing up all these human traits and putting them into equation. He doesn't want to leave anything, any stone unturned. So now where that mood comes from? Does it come from an individual, from Dasein? Does it come from you? No, it doesn't come from you. Because if you were not in that dark alley, you wouldn't get into that mood of fear. So where it comes? Oh, maybe it comes from outside. No, it doesn't, because there are other people walking down that alley, but they don't fear that they don't have that feeling of fear. They just walk, it's fine. So he says, he's not within you, but he's not outside you. He's in you and outside you. That's that mixture, again, that involvement between you and the world that surrounds you. Again and again, he's pointing out to that connection, to that interaction between the world and us, Dasein. There is so much to say. I will skip few parts, but I think it's important to say something about das Man, or the man, or the others, as Heidegger talks about, how others influence our lives. Very important to understand is his emphasis on Thrownness. You see how many words he's using. They're not everyday words. And he also points out in a few occasions, especially in a few interviews, about the importance of language. So what Thrownness means? He says, where we are born, we are simply thrown into the world. Thrown into the world. We open our eyes, and we don't choose the time we are born in. We could have been born in 5th century, 12th. We don't choose the place we are born. We don't choose our parents. We don't choose anything. We just happen to be thrown into the world. I mean, this is not only existential atomic bomb. This is something atomic for liberalism or liberal philosophy, which we will talk soon about. Liberalism is based on this fact that when you are born, you are thrown into the world. And then what happens? Heidegger asks his students, what happens when the baby is born? What happens when the man opens his or her eyes first time? What the baby wants, Heidegger asks. Students answer, baby wants mother, father, protection, food. He says no. Baby wants to know from the first moment of his or her life, what is the meaning of this world around me? See how generic this is. What is the meaning of this world? Imagine you open your eyes and you see people around you, and the light, and movement, and different colors, all of a sudden. So the question is, what is all about? What is this? And that question doesn't abandon individual for the rest of their lives. They never stop wondering about the meaning of the world. As he says, only Dasein can ask about the meaning of the world. And this is the essential trait of humans. Asking the question about being and everything else around us. And then from there, we go to something that he calls understanding. And again, his attempt to bring together world and Dasein, and history, and language, and tradition, and everything that is around us. So he say, what do you see when you see a painting? Science would say to us, you don't see anything. Science says you see light reflecting from that particular object and from these particular colors, and you see those shapes because in your brain this is the reflection caused by light rays. Maybe there is somebody here who can explain it a little bit better. I'm not a physicist, but this is what science says. And Heidegger says no. No, he says. He mentions a beautiful example, maybe you've seen it somewhere, Van Gogh's painting of shoes. You see, when you see that painting, pair of women's shoes, what do you see? You don't see the light rays and reflection of objects and colors and whatever. He says you see the world revealed in front of you. What world? He says when you see those shoes, you don't see those shoes. Van Gogh wanted to show you something else. He wanted to show you the life of a woman peasant, the hardship. You can see it from the shoes. Just look at them. Look at that leather, how bent it is, how used it is, how worn out it is. You can see her feet in those shoes. You can see her taking them on every morning and taking them off after hard labor of 10, 12 hours in the mud on the fields of Holland in order to sit down and wash herself and rest. You can see the hardship of life in those shoes. Struggle to survive, hope that the field is going to bring enough crops that she will be able to feed her children. And this is his beautiful understanding of art. You see how much you can see if you know how to see. And you will be not able to see that unless you are in the world and unless you are Dasein, somebody who can ask about the meaning of those shoes. So when the artist presents something, the great art, or a symphony, with great composers, they are not just there juggling with our superficial senses. They are sending us a message of the meaning of the world. And this is what he wants to explain. That understanding is not just contemplating about something, but seeing the whole evolution of humanity developing in front of you. This is the aim of understanding. When it comes to objects, what it means to understand scissors. What do you mean by scissors? If somebody asks me, what are scissors? What are you going to say to them? These are two metal parts with two oval plastic parts. No, you're not going to say that. You know what scissors are. They're cutting, they're there to cut the paper, for example. But you know that they're not going to cut the metal. So by understanding the function of the object, you are understanding it. Again, that action and interaction with the world around us. And then, the last chapter is that famous Das Man, everydayness and the one. So he says, we live in the world as we are thrown in the world. We inherit a culture, we inherit our parents, we go to school, we get our friends, we live a certain way of life, which is given to us. They have given to you. That life was there, that culture was there, tradition was there, religion was there. You are just coming into it, and that is delivered to you So what about you? What about you as an individual? Again, existential question. Or you as an autonomous entity? Or maybe you as a free human being? What about you? Do you exist like that? Oscar Wilde puts it beautifully, exactly the same problem. He says, few people ever possess their souls before they die. Nothing is more rare in any man, says Emerson, than an act of his own. It is quite true. Most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions. Their lives are mimicry. Their passions are quotation. So this is the tyranny of the them that every single existential philosopher saw and stood up against it. But Heidegger says they and that culture that we inherit is actually very important for us. What would we do without it? It helps us, helps majority of people to live decent lives. The problem is, he says, when people forget about their autonomy or individuality and get completely taken away by they. He says he calls it the dictatorship of the one. He says we take pleasure and enjoy ourselves as one takes pleasure. We read, see and judge about literature and art as one sees and judges. Likewise, we shrink back from the great mass as one shrinks back. We find shocking what one finds shocking. The one, which is nothing definite and which we all are, taught not as a sum, prescribes the kind of being in everydayness. So the danger is if I totally disburden myself. Everything is fine, I'm just living the life as everybody else, there's absolutely no problems. But then there is nothing that you can call authentic. And we know Sartre spoke about freedom, because that authenticity, that freedom, is a dangerous thing. And Sartre later says, relating to that we are condemned to be free. Because freedom doesn't come without responsibilities. And this is existentialism all about. So you can choose your authenticity, you can choose your actions, but you have to take the responsibilities for all of them, whatever they are. Now, there is much more to say. There is the last part, which I'm going to use just to finish, and this is death and authenticity. Heidegger talks about death. While every other existential philosophy considered dealing with existence, the best way of dealing with existence, actually flying away from it, and including death. So we don't talk about it. When somebody dies, we always say, that person died. You know, we think we know something about that, but we don't, because we never experienced it. In his philosophy, you need to experience in order to know. So you never know anything about it. You only know what happens after somebody dies. But to experience death, you have to die. But then there is not going to be you to then talk about it and tell us about that experience. But he says the general approach towards that is to run away from it, to ignore it. And he says people usually misplace the cause of death with the essence of death. For Heidegger, to face death, to anticipate death, to anticipate death as our own most possibility, which means this is the possibility of complete impossibility. Because when you die, all possibilities go. So that is possibility for complete impossibility. So facing it and anticipating that, you understand that the day that others cannot do anything about it, your death is your own most possibility, and you can't escape it. And all these others, they are taking care of you, they're telling you what to do, they cannot find the best solution for you, because they cannot help you to exist after you die. So death is your final destination. And from the moment you understand that until you die, which is an inevitable thing, the only fact in life is that you have to die, you got some time to act. And he said, what that brings anxiety. We develop anxiety, thinking about it. But anxiety should not be understood as something wrong. Should be understood as something good, because it propels you to action, to be authentic. He fell so short of saying how to be authentic, maybe because of his past, which is quite peculiar. And I didn't mention it deliberately. We tackle that in the questions and answers in a minute. But this is one possibly, not only one, but one obvious issue in his philosophy, that he doesn't say to us what it means to be authentic. Sartre gives us an example. You choose your life, whatever it is, and then you are there for responsibilities. You take it over. If you have to pay the price, you have to pay the price. Nobody can tell you what to do, but you have to decide what to do to run out of that. So far, everything I said comes from his main book, which is called Being and Time, published in 1927. It caused shockwaves in the world of philosophy. In a way, destroyed metaphysics as we knew until Heidegger. Brought to issue a few problems of existence, authenticity, others, us, dualism, seeing the world as substance only. But Heidegger didn't stop there. But we will stop there. Because what it comes after 1928 is known as the term. This is the second phase of Heidegger's philosophical thinking. And I will devote another lecture to that. Next one is going to be about Heidegger's turn, in which he doesn't go completely against the teaching from the Being and Time, but in a way adjusts a little bit and pays more attention to the earth as he did in Being and Time. So we're going to leave that for the next time. I hope my presentation wasn't too confusing, and if it was, I will try to help to unconceal, as Heidegger would say, whatever was so complicated. Thank you.